Thank you, everyone, for joining us for this session of 5 pre-sales data-driven KPIs with David Marsh. My name is James Birdsall, and I'm the Director of Demand Generation at Consensus, and I'll be your moderator for today's session. DEMOFEST is presented by Consensus. Consensus is an intelligent demo automation software that helps scale pre-sales with interactive video demos. You can learn more at goconsensus.com. Consensus is proud to provide this event for free to all attendees. However, we would like to invite each of you to donate to our company's humanitarian organizations if you'd like to. You can learn more about this and donate via the link in the reception, or visit our expo hall and check out our DEMOFEST Gives Back booth. We encourage you to participate in today's session. We've seen a lot of great comments in chat in other sessions, and would love to see additional participation here in this session. You can use the chat function. If you haven't seen it already, it's up on the chat tab, as you can see here. Throughout the session, you may see some polls. We encourage you to participate there as well, whenever applicable. And our speaker, David, will be taking questions from the audience throughout his presentation, and at the end, there will be time for some Q&A. So please navigate over to that Q&A box and throw your questions in there so we can get them answered. And if at any time you're having technical difficulties, toggle to your profile in the upper right corner and click Get Support, and we can get those solved as soon as possible. And now I'd like to introduce our speaker, David Marsh. He currently serves as the Global Vice President for Sales Engineering at MRI Software. He leads a team of talented sales engineers across the globe as they help drive the MRI flywheel. And with that, I will turn the rest of the time over to you, David.
Thanks a lot, James. Well, thank you, everyone, for coming today. Welcome to the DEMOFEST session on 5 pre-sales data-driven KPIs. So my goal today is to share 5 specific key performance indicators that you can start using today to help drive data in your pre-sales revenue streams. And I'm sure you're asking yourself the same question I ask myself at the beginning of every session: why should you listen to me? And I ask myself, why should I listen to the speaker? Well, the reason is because I have a lot of experience making most, if not all, of the mistakes that you can make when you're measuring pre-sales data. I've done things from measuring the wrong things, so-called vanity metrics, to measuring the right things in the wrong way. And I've learned a few lessons along the way. We'll talk about that as we go through today. So a little bit about my background. I started the craft of sales engineering, or pre-sales, back in 1999 with Cisco Systems, and grew and developed through different experiences at places like RSA Security, EMC, Marketo, Adobe, and now MRI Software. I learn more every time I'm with a new team and a new business with people that have diverse experiences. I always learn from people. And that's one thing I'm hoping today, is that we can learn from each other. So if you have questions while we're going through, please ask them as we go. Let's make it interactive. I'm not going to kill you with slides today. I have 9 slides total, including the title slide. So I'm looking for conversation and for us to figure out what works together today. So let's be very interactive. And I wasn't always crazy about being data-driven and having a data-driven pre-sales strategy. One of the things that really stuck with me was when I was at Adobe, and I found out about this concept of something called the Adobe Data-Driven Operating Model. So Adobe had too many metrics. They were drowning in it. They were a huge business, software business. Of course, they have all the desktop publishing software, artistic software, what have you. They switched over to a cloud model, and they had these metrics everywhere. And it was very difficult for the leaders to manage the business. And then one day, one of the leaders proposed a new model, this data-driven operating model. And the whole concept was that they broke down their customer journey map, the entire journey of their customers. And they looked at key inflection points. And they said, that's where we're going to measure the things that matter. That's where we're going to measure those KPIs. So with that, they had every one of these KPIs, they brought them down from over 400 metrics and KPIs they were using to manage the business to around 50 something. And they really say that they have a core set of KPIs of 12 to 15 that they use to manage the business. And the question is how can you use this strategy? There was a question in the chat about, am I sharing a PowerPoint? Can everybody else see the PowerPoint? I'm still on the title slide. Okay, good. Just making sure. All right, that's what brought me up short. So short story, Adobe puts in this data-driven operating model, and they went from what was a $5 billion business in 2015 to a $16 billion business today. So they tripled revenue. My goal is to create a pre-sales data-driven operating model in every business I'm a part of. At the end of the day, we need to remember that data is just a part of the story, right? Data-driven storytelling has multiple parts. You've got your data set, you've got the visualizations that you use to tell the story, and then you have the narrative or the story. So let's keep it interactive, and we'll move on and start talking about key performance indicators. Okay, so what are key performance indicators? These are the critical things that you look at to manage your business. It's part of being a data-driven storyteller. You've got to have the data sets that you need, and that's what these KPIs all. Can everybody see? Did it advance the slide now? All good? KPIs. All right, all good. So with these KPIs, you're looking at metrics. So you've got metrics like your daily things, right? How many demos am I doing? How many discovery calls am I doing? Those are important, but you don't know if all of those are good, right? You could have some amount of demos that are not well qualified, or ones that never should have been brought in the first place. So those are metrics, but you need to focus on what really moves the needle for you. And that's where the KPIs come in. So if you think about it from a data storytelling standpoint, you've got your data, you have your visualizations, and you have your narrative or story that you want to tell. So when you start thinking about these KPIs, I want you to think about 4 dimensions that a good KPI should have. So first of all, you've got to be measuring something. It should be, for the most part, quantitative. We'll talk a little bit about qualitative measures as well, but some type of unit. So a good example might be, what's the total number of demos that you want to support this year, or total demos for service or product A or B, right? You've got to have a target to know whether you got there or not. You've got to have a data source that you use to pull that data from, and we'll talk more about that. And how do you build the fundamental building blocks that you can use to come up with these KPIs and metrics? And then you've got to have some frequency. So how often are you going to report on this metric? Are you going to do it daily? Are you going to do it weekly, monthly, etc.? I ask my leadership team to report on these metrics back to me on a weekly cadence. That way I can roll up things to the C-suite on either a monthly or a quarterly basis and show our impact. So that requires a little bit of thinking as you're pulling the data in. You know, how often are you going to report on it? Who are you going to report it to? That needs to be part of your overall data-driven strategy. Now, also, in addition to the 4 things that you want with a good KPI, there's a few different flavors or types. You can have a progress indicator KPI to say, hey, look, we've got 100 million in target bookings this year, and we're 90% of the way there. Or you can say just a raw number, right? I want to make sure that we have discovery notes for 100% of our demos before we agree to do a demo. So you can measure just a raw number of how many of those you have. Or percentage change, which I think is a little bit more interesting, because you can see how you're increasing or decreasing, and you start being able to do trending analysis on the numbers that you're looking at. So, you know, keep in mind that a lot of these things are not going to be obvious until after you've measured them for a few cycles. So one thing I want to point out here is, I'm sure you're all looking at this slide and saying, well, David, there's 6 KPIs here. You said it was going to be 5 KPIs. You gave me 6. Well, I can count. The reason I added in velocity at the last moment is because we recently deployed Consensus, and now I'm experimenting with some new metrics that I want to use. And velocity is one that I'm trying to measure. I haven't quite figured out. I'm hoping someone in the audience can have a comment or two about how they're measuring velocity these days. So with that, let's move on and talk about leading versus lagging indicators. So leading is something that's giving you an idea of where you're going, and lagging is looking back at where you've gone and how you did, right? So you can think about it as either being predictive or looking back at your results. And I've given you a couple examples here. So demos scheduled for the next 30 days are something that I like to look at because it lets us know what is the anticipated demand for a given product. We're acquiring 6 to 10 businesses a year with new products. So it's very important for me to understand, are we going to see a hockey stick in demand, or is it relatively linear, or is it falling off, which is even worse, right? It gives me some data to go back to the product team and the sales team and say, hey, we need to look at this because all of a sudden people are coming out of the woodwork for demos. Lagging indicators are very popular because closed won and your win rate is something you can really only determine after the fact. And we'll talk a little bit about that. But it's important to think about some things are leading and some things are lagging. So just a little story from my time at Marketo. We started to look at the demo qualification process a little bit more closely because it was a constant battle for us to support all of the inbound demo requests. So like a lot of you, we were in hyper growth mode, and the SDRs and AEs were outpacing us and requesting multiple demos from the same sales engineer in the same time slot on the same day sometimes. So it's partially a scheduling issue, and we did something a little bit different to make sure that we had scheduling capacity. But it was also a qualification and scaling issue. So what do? We looked at the data. So the first thing that we did is we looked at all our data and we broke it down by different deal size values. So this is back when our average contract value was about 25K, and we did it in 25K slices after that. And what we found looking at the data was that, hey, our win rate was about 20% lower for those deals less than 25K. Now, my hypothesis was we're not qualifying these deals well enough, but obviously you need a little bit more than just a gut feeling. So I also combined qualitative data from my sales engineering team telling me, hey, look, a lot of the new salespeople don't have the discovery process down. They're not qualifying these deals. There's a lot of deals that are qualified, or we're going to have to, we're killing them after one demo because they weren't a good fit. So we put a threshold in place that all first demos for deals less than 25K were done by the sales team first. Now, I know you're probably saying that's great. You can't just tell the sales team that. Well, that's true. You don't just cut it off. We partnered with sales leadership to get the buy-in to enable the sales team. And that's another common theme I'm sure you've heard over the past couple of days with DEMOFEST is sales enablement is a key part of this, right? So in our case, we pioneered several sales enablement approaches. We did recorded demo walkthroughs using videos. It was older video technology, but we had a 6-week boot camp that we ran new salespeople and sales engineers through. And this freed up the load on the team a great deal. So we had a system called Marketo Live. We had a demo data set, scripts that we taught everybody. And a lot of those people have gone on to run enablement at other unicorn companies or started companies like Demo Blocks to help other people with their demo data sets. So you'll notice that theme of sales enablement being critical. But in the end, the point I want to make is that our approach of having different tiers of support for demos helped to scale the team, and it was all driven because we looked at the data first. All right. Velocity, the first one. So time to demo delivered. One of the things that we knew a while back was that when you respond to people, when they're interested in something, they download a white paper or some content from your website, the faster you get that lead to an SDR and the faster somebody calls them, the better your close rate is going to be. Well, my hypothesis is I think it's going to be the same way for demos. So I want to get somebody demo information as fast as possible. And this is where I'm going to start expecting some feedback and pushback, because I fully believe that you shouldn't show up unprepared to a demo. And I know a lot of you are probably going to say, well, you need to do your discovery and everything before you get in there and get blindsided. That's true, but the point is, what I'm going to try to do is use the call to action link on the website that says request a demo now. I'm going to try to give them video demo content immediately, better qualify them, and then see if that impacts my win rates. So, just a little story about how I got there. And then I'd love to hear from all of you, what do you think about this velocity metric, and are you tracking velocity? So, when I was looking at options for scaling my team, I came across Consensus. My goal was to scale the team without having to add headcount in a linear fashion. So, for example, for every 5 salespeople you hire 1 sales engineer. If you do that, there's going to be a predictable cost, but you need to be able to scale more efficiently. So I tried using what was in Salesforce first, but when I was connecting the dots between the number of demos and the win rate, it's a little challenging. And a couple of people in other sessions have talked about this, because there's a lot of different reasons you can lose a deal. I talked to several of you in the pre-sales community, and thank you very much for your help. If you were one of the people that I asked for help on what should we be doing, and scheduled a pilot with the Consensus team, because what I was missing was the data, right? I couldn't say that for X number of demos, we could get them information faster in the process and we could close it faster. So I was looking for that demo data. I also read Garen's book, Selling is Hard, Buying is Harder. And a lot of that information resonated with me and my experiences that I've had. So, today we're deploying it globally. We're just getting started. The 2 metrics I'm actually using to look at today is engagement. So how long are they watching the videos that we send out? And then new leads discovered, or the discovery rate, right? If they turn around and send a Consensus video to 5 people, it creates 5 new contacts and leads in our Salesforce instance, and we're mapping out that buying committee. So I'm very interested in using those, but I want to go beyond it to velocity. So I would love it if somebody would love to chime in on how they're actually using velocity and how they think we could use velocity. Let's see. Number of engaged shareholders. All right, I like that. And definitely doing things faster. So, depending on whether it's an inbound or an outbound lead, I think that's going to impact the velocity measurement, right? Because if somebody downloads a white paper, then you've got a very easy way to say, okay, they contacted me on this day, we got them a video immediately, and then we scheduled a demo 3 days later. I think, the gray space for me, or the uncertainty, is around outbounding. So if the salesperson calls somebody and then they schedule a demo, we'll be able to measure the time between that, but there's no telling how long before they were actually looking for it. And I know with some marketing platforms, you can get a lot of intent data and measure some of those things in those fashions, right? You can say, I know that so-and-so customer or prospect hit my web page last week, and then we were able to follow up with a call in from an SDR and then set up a demo. So the speed, and can the speed actually help us close deals faster, is super important to me. Amount of time spent on demos versus win rate, work on selling more in less time. Yeah, possibly. So I think it will be an impact to the win rate. We'll talk about win rate in a couple of slides, but my thought is the faster we get somebody something in the sales cycle that they're looking for, demo content, video content, what have you, the better the response is going to be. So that's a new metric that I'm playing around with. Let's talk about ARR influence. So I feel like this is kind of the ultimate scoreboard for a sales organization and a pre-sales organization. What impact are we having? So the way that I pose these to my leadership is in the form of questions. So what impact are we having? Well, how are we going to measure that ARR influence? And for us, we have a software as a service model. We do our contracts and we get paid on an annual basis. Therefore, ARR is the most important thing to my team and how we measure things. If you have a subscription-based business model, it may be monthly recurring revenue that you're more interested in. So you may have to adapt this for your business model and how you use it. And the reason why this is so important to me is because it shows how much revenue we influence and helps us optimize for revenue coverage. And when I say revenue coverage, I'm just talking about how much revenue does a given sales engineer support. I think that's a very key number for every sales engineering leader to know, both at a team level, all of your team, and then regional levels, if you have regions, and then individual contributors. And that's something that I tell every one of my sales engineers that I coach is you need to know your numbers. And one of the numbers you need to know is how much revenue did you influence? How much ARR did you influence? And I think it's helpful to have systems that help you automate some of this collection and calculation. Now, it's not to say that you can't do this manually, and I'll talk about that in a second, but it's important that you start knowing some of these numbers. So sales being the data based on sales ops being created after consensus views. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit now about what are the fundamental building blocks you need to come up with something like ARR influenced, and talk about how we look at MQLs and SQLs. So let me start out with the first question, and then I'll dig into some of these building blocks. So that leading indicator of next 30 days, is it reasonable in a world where waiting 5+ days can be a detractor? I think it is, because I think it depends on what you're selling and the complexity of the solution you're selling. So in our case, we sell real estate software. So in a lot of cases, large organizations that have lots of real estate, they don't move super fast. So they plan things weeks out. Obviously, faster is better in most cases. But again, you always have to balance out, do you want to get into a demo situation where it's partial discovery and partial demo? And that's the whole thought behind demo automation, is you get people information so they can self-qualify out, if you will. So I still like the leading indicator. And once I shared that with my chief sales officer, he started asking me for that data, because he can go back to the board and say, well, during COVID, right, we saw a tremendous drop off in a lot of the activities we were doing. And he was on me all the time for, hey, David, when are the requests for demos picking back up? When are those team member requests? When are those going back up month over month? Because that gave him a little bit of advance notice to start looking to the sales leaders to expect that their sales activity was going to go up, or was going up, right? So great question. What mechanism are you using to capture number of demos scheduled, delivered, et cetera? Okay, let's talk about building blocks a little bit. So we're using Salesforce, and we're using Vivint sitting on top of Salesforce. Now, you can do this in a manual fashion too. So let me talk about that as well, because you need to understand, for any system that you put this data into, you need to understand how the numbers flow through so you can know if they're accurate or not. So when you start building out your data set, you generally want to have a CRM like Salesforce or Sugar CRM, Microsoft Dynamics, whatever you want to use. But I always use Salesforce. So you can even do it manually in an Excel spreadsheet, but I think you need 4 fundamental building blocks. And I use an acronym called COLA. So contacts, opportunities, leads, and accounts. And we'll talk about each one of those and why they're important to start coming up with some of these numbers. So contacts are people who you have contact information for, hopefully an email address and a phone number, but sometimes marketing teams buy lists, right? So they only have email addresses, and a certain number of those are going to be garbage, and then very few of those are going to respond. So buying lists is not nearly as good as generating inbound activity to your business through content marketing, things like that, with marketing automation. So keep that in mind. Opportunities are deals that you think you're going to have a chance to win. So this generally means that it's gone through your process to some point, right? So to the question about MQLs, hopefully everybody's familiar with the terminology, but MQL is a marketing qualified lead. So if you look at it, and some people have moved away from the funnel terminology to more of a flywheel terminology, but people that you don't know are suspects, right? They start coming in and asking for something. They're a prospect, or you call them, they could be a prospect. It depends on if it's an inbound or outbound model. But once they show interest and they start showing intent data, either through Google searches, going to your website, going to your conferences, everything that they do makes them a little bit more attractive of a lead to your business. And that's where lead scoring comes in. And a lot of the marketing automation tools will do lead scoring for you. But if you think about it from a left to right motion, you're going from this prospect to a MQL or marketing qualified lead. Then you take that next step. And if the SDR hands it over to the salesperson and says, hey, you want to talk to this person, then it could be a sales qualified lead once it hits a certain score. And then before it becomes an opportunity, generally a lot of people will say it has to be a sales accepted lead. So the salesperson talked to them, they answered enough questions in the right way for the salesperson to say, you know what, I'm going to create an opportunity and I'm willing to talk to my boss about this being a real deal instead of, not being one. So MQL, SQL, and then you get to the opportunity. Once you get the opportunities, you want multiple opportunities. So leads are contacts that either ask for information inbound or you call them, which is outbound. But the last part of COLA, right, is accounts. So an account is a company you want to sell to. An account can and hopefully will have multiple opportunities because you want to keep selling them more and more, and you want to keep them a customer for a long time. So with that, right, that turns into lifetime customer value, or LTCV. That's a KPI that's killed a lot of companies because they spend more money acquiring customers than they ever make back from them. So just a quick note on that. Most SaaS companies don't make back their initial investment of acquiring a customer until year 2 or later. So you always are looking to get that customer positive and get that LTC positive instead of negative. Now, revenue coverage, we talked to, actually other people have talked about this as well. This is a very interesting number because you can tell the story to the C-suite of how much revenue does each one of your sales engineers touch. So very simple example, if you've got 100, or if you've got 10 million in revenue and you've got 10 SEs, then you would say each sales engineer generates $1 million in revenue. Now that assumes 100% attach rate. So let's talk about that a little bit. An attach rate is simply the percentage of deals that your team touches. So if your team touched all 10 million, you'd have 100% attach rate. But normally that's not the case. If you've got multiple products, a lot of times there's things that the sales team sells by themselves and your team doesn't touch. That's why this ARR influence is a number that's derived by looking at only the opportunities that your team touched that turned into wins. Hopefully that flows through. And I've shown an example here, total number of opportunities. And then if you have the hours, you can actually get a per hour efficiency or a per hour dollar rating of what your team generates. Now, one thing I will say is a pro tip on attach rate. I've had problems with attach rate in the past. And when I put new systems in, the attach rate goes way down. If it's not where you want it to be, you need to look at your filters and make sure that you are filtering out everything that you should be filtering out. Okay. Because if you have things like license renewals or database upgrades, things that the sales engineering team doesn't touch, that needs to be taken out of your calculation, and that will raise up your attach rate and make that look better. I think that's a key story for any SE leader, is to say, hey, CEO, Mr. Mrs. CEO, we win more deals when we have sales engineers attached to a deal. So look at this data. I've got a data set of total opportunities closed won, and then where my team did not touch. Then I've got a set where we touched it, we won it. And my hypothesis is always it's going to be some percentage points, hopefully a lot of percentage points higher than deals that we don't touch. That's why I like this measure so much. Let's see. I'll hit a couple more of these in the FAQ. We're going to talk about hours of prep and demo time. So that's going to be our utilization rate. Tracking down to the level for ARR influenced, where the SE only supported the demo or technical vetting. So anything in our system, any deal that had an activity or a deliverable against that deal, we count towards our ARR influenced, right? So if we did an RFP, if we did a discovery call, right? Every one of those deals we touched, we took time and invested into those deals and came up with that calculation. All right. Let's talk about win rate. That's another one that I've heard in a lot of sessions. And I know a lot of people don't particularly like the win rate because there's a lot of fuzziness in it, right? Because there's a lot of reasons you can win or not win. So I asked my team, how often do we win? And really, this is just a conversion rate. This is for all the deals that you touched, how many of those did you win? And you need to make sure, one thing I will say that regardless of whatever CRM or pre-sales tool you're using, you need to make sure that you understand how the numbers flow between them, because you need to be able to normalize those and understand if there's any discrepancies in the win rate. So it seems simple, but it's not. I like sports analogies, so I'm going to use them. I apologize in advance if you have sports analogy fatigue. So win rate's kind of like a scoreboard for your sports team. It's one of the key levers that you can pull to increase revenue. You just win more of the games that are already on the schedule, right? For a given number of leads, MQLs, SQLs coming into your pipeline, if you win more of them, you will have more revenue come out the backside. Now, one thing that I think is worth discussing is, technical wins. Are technical wins important? I think they are, but we don't measure them, because you can have a technical win and make yourself feel better, but you still don't win the deal. So the sales team doesn't get paid and you don't get paid. So that's why my focus is more on win rate, and win rate by product, if I can get it, right? So I can see, are there products where we're clearly superior versus inferior on it? So you need to make sure that you're capturing some of this data in a win-loss analysis for why you win or why you lose, so you can understand how you can impact this win rate. So in the context, I'm a huge believer in the 80-20 rule. And that just says that 80% of your results are going to come from 20% of your efforts. In the context of sales engineering, 80% of the reasons that you're winning or losing deals, you can probably capture in a top 3 list on both sides. So from my perspective, common reasons to win deals are superior product, superior client experience, or superior pricing, meaning lower pricing in most cases, or more simplified pricing. Common reasons to lose deal are kind of the flip side of that, and that's how we look at our win and loss codes. Inferior product or product gaps, inferior client experience, the sales experience wasn't as good, or pricing. They came in and undercut us on pricing. I am interested to hear from the team on other reasons that you might be tracking for winning or losing deals, because I'm always interested in improving our win-loss stuff. So let's see, do you count wins if it's a straight through win involving consensus? So I treat, at this point, we're treating consensus wins where we use consensus content kind of like SE touches, right? So if we provide the content, we can track it back. We're going to say, yeah, we touched it with our pre-sales demo automation technology, and we're going to use that for attribution. What do you include in ARR influence? Annual subscription? What about implementation services? Well, I think that depends on your business model. Okay. So if your sales team and your sales engineers get paid for services, then yeah, you may want to look at that. If you don't, then you probably don't want to look at that. But there's more technical calculations and ways of looking at ARR if you're looking at it at a business level as the C-suite, but for revenue influenced and me making the case that we win more deals with sales engineering involved, I generally just look at everything that we touch and what percentage we win of those versus just the sales team flying solo. Let's see. Lots of great questions. If you don't have real targets or goals to go after, how many ops would it be best to get an average baseline and benchmark it as the target? So great question, actually. And it touches on some of the things that we learned when we were trying to figure out win rates and ratios. I know a lot of people will just say, hey, if I hire 5 salespeople, I need a sales engineer. And the finance team my finance team asked me for more data. So we went back and looked at our past 5 years and revenue coverage and ratio. And what we determined was that once we got past a certain amount of revenue, our win rate actually started going down because we were covering so many people, and we run pretty lean. We have about 10 salespeople to each sales engineer. So I want to try to get that down actually a little bit this year and see how it plays with the metrics. But once we see that number go over 10, we see an immediate decrease in win rate. And I was able to take that data back to the finance team and say, hey, look, this revenue coverage is a thing, especially for these products. So yeah, the targets, you want to make sure that whatever targets you set, you're able to go back at the end of the year and say, well, for this amount of headcount, this is the revenue contribution or coverage we had, and this was our win rate for it. So, yep. Let me see, make sure I'm not missing any of these. And James, you're going to have to keep me honest on these. I know I'm answering a couple of them, but I haven't marked them answered yet. But there's a lot of good questions here. All right. Let me pick it up just a little bit because I want to make sure you see all of the metrics, and then I'll try to answer some more questions. All right, so that's win rate. Let's talk about outcomes by effort. So this one's a little bit less straightforward maybe than some of the other ones, but I like taking this information of deals that we win and deals that we lose and plotting it out on a graph like this. So you take the deals that you win and how much ARR they're worth, and then you plot them against the deals that you lose and how much they're worth. And you can also get a sense of time investment. So one of the key themes is utilization and how much time are we spending winning deals versus losing deals. I think that's very interesting information. And I've used it for a couple of different things. And I put in here, it helps you optimize demo feedback, but it really, what I mean by that is that when my team says, hey, this product needs a lot of product work because we end up doing a lot more services. We do, 10 hours of data prep for a demo for this product versus this product. That starts being borne out on this chart because I can see that the amount of time the team spends for wins and losses are vastly longer for some products than others. And that's why I think this effectiveness measure of outcomes by effort is interesting for my team. So, it touches several parts of your business, like your utilization, how much time, how many activities and deliverables do you have? And my view of this is you want to be able to win and lose as fast as possible. If you're going to lose a deal, don't sink hundreds of hours into it, right? Obviously, there's some things that you're always going to have to chase because it's strategic, it's a key logo, what have you. But the sooner that you can get to that point where you have the understanding that you can disengage if you need to, it's valuable information. So with this, you can start looking at your outliers and you can go back and say, why are we losing these kind of deals, or why are we winning these kind of deals, and how do we do more of it? So this is going to vary a little bit based on your pre-sales process and how complex it is. So for example, if every one of your sales cycles requires a proof of value or a proof of concept, your time investment is probably going to be higher. But your average contract value is probably going to be higher as well. So all these things factor into your metrics and how you use it. But I think it's a useful question to ask yourself: how effective are we? How fast do we win the deals we need to win? The next one is probably going to be familiar to everyone: utilization rate. So how busy are we? This one has bitten me very hard in the past. So, how much time do we spend on customer-facing activities? This is a key scaling and gets into your scaling issue and gets into your capacity planning. So it's important because you need to plan ahead for when you're going to need more headcount, right? Sometimes you can do it. Freddie said in his session, you can look to invest in people, process, or tools, and that's great. But at some point, the people aspect is going to be one thing you're going to need to go to, and you're going to need to build the business case or justification for that, right? So if you can understand how much your team's time is spent on revenue generating activities, you can make a very good case for why your team shouldn't be doing certain things. In my business, I'm responsible for bid management, RFPs, proposals, things like that. But I know other leaders that have pushed some of that stuff off because they've been able to say, hey, look, that's not part of our revenue generating activities. We need marketing or product or somebody else to handle that. So that is a valid factor for you to look at. And it's important. I don't like to track everything down to the hour. I've been in situations, I've had post-sales teams where they're billable on an hourly basis. I fully get that. You've got to track that. But, just for a story, when I first got to Marketo, one of my key sales engineers left, and I found myself drowning in demos, and the team that I did have were excellent, but they started to get burned out, right? So it kind of slapped me upside the head, and it was so obvious. I didn't need a graphic at that point. I knew I needed to spend all my time on recruiting and onboarding, and luckily work with the other teams so that they picked up some of that slack while we got more SEs in the door. So a good rule of thumb for me on this is about 60% customer-facing activity. I know that professional services orgs do 70, 80%, and that's because a lot of those people are billable at an hourly rate. But nobody feels valued and supported if you have them doing 100% of their time spent on demos. You need to give them some time for learning and career development. You need to give them some time for project-based work. So that's what I shoot for. Your results may vary. But what I will say is you can calculate this out. You can look at how many hours of customer-facing activity are you doing, and then divide it and come out with a percentage so you understand how not to burn your people out and when you need to starting to go ask for more headcount in that position. All right. Last metric is total product gaps. So this one is interesting to me because it answers the question for me of what the customers want. This is really capturing and quantifying, putting a dollar amount on features, right? It's the voice of the customer. What do they want? How much revenue can we deliver if we address what they're asking for? So this is a feedback loop. And this is one of the things that I think that sales engineering does very, very well, above and beyond providing value by showing the software and the solutions and implementing in some cases. This allows us to capture and quantify the voice of the customer. So it's an amazing way for us to add value and get visibility and help out the product team. Now, funny story, I have had product owners tell me that they didn't like that approach because it would limit their creative ability, no lie, to build what the market needed. Now, I'm paraphrasing, but they really didn't want to be constrained, and they didn't want to have to explain why they weren't listening to the data. So for me, I found the best way to approach this is position this data as just one set of data points for product leadership to consider. I think it's super important, and I think a lot of people are successful because this is basically people telling you, if you had this, I would buy it. So most product leaders I talk to love it when I'm able to show them how many opportunities roll up and how many dollars are in the pipeline for a given feature. So this is all built on product gaps, and then we've got opportunity gaps for new opportunities or account gaps for existing accounts. But it's interesting data, and again, it allows us to add more value through the data that we're capturing. So with that, James, if you will, let's open it up and let's chat about some of these as we go through. I know we've got quite a few questions built up.
Yeah, it's been great. Thank you so much for everyone participating in the chat and with your questions. It's been awesome. Been very lively. One question that was asked a little bit ago, I want to make sure that we cover. Bill asked a question about what are you using to see upcoming demos? You know, that do you use a scheduling tool? You know, with a large team, how do you manage those people's time?
Yeah, so like we use Vivin. Vivin sits on top of Salesforce, and it integrates with our calendars, so it helps with when a salesperson sends a request for a demo, then we get to assign that to a sales engineer, and the integration takes care of the calendaring for us and puts it on their calendar whenever they agree that they're going to do that demo. So that also feeds itself into building a chart that says demos for the next 30 days. You can see as you assign these demos out to your sales engineers, how many they have for the next 30 days. And then you can start filtering it down by product line, things like that.
Awesome. Thank you. Something that seemed to struck a nerve in chat was measuring utilization. You know, that it seems like since so much of it is, you know, kind of qualitative, you know, just from a behavioral standpoint, it's hard to get people to say like, oh yeah, I spent the last 30 minutes on this thing or an hour doing this.
Mm-hmm.
You know, what from a behavioral standpoint that is actually going to be, you can scale in a team. What are some recommendations that you have on tracking utilization on the team?
Yeah, well, I think, you know, Freddie touched on this in his session. There's been several leaders that have touched on it. You need this as automated as possible. You know, it's just like salespeople spending 65% plus of their time on non-sales activities. You don't want your sales engineers spending the majority of their time collecting data. So you need a system that's going to help them do it. And if you're doing it manually, it's going to be a pretty heavy lift to start with. But as you get enablement, as you maybe start working towards a RevOps infrastructure, you can start having other teams help you with some of that. But in our case, we're fortunate enough to have tools that we can automate to say, when I give you a demo, I'm just going to assume that you're going to have an hour of discovery attached to that. And then it's really a process and a behavior that you have to work with the team, and you have to show them the benefits of being able to know their numbers and have their utilization rate with the system. So sometimes they may have to go back in and say, well, I really only did 30 minutes of discovery, or I had to do 2 hours of discovery for this. So there's a little tweaking that has to go on, but not a whole lot. There's already a process flow in place and a routing process that happens. So if you can get a tool set or build a tool set, you can even do it in Salesforce. So when I was at Marketo and Adobe, we did this all in Salesforce. We had an unbelievable sales operations and marketing operations team. So if you've got a lot of people around with those skill sets, they can build those workflows into your CRM for you. But you definitely want to have some core unit of activity, like activity or deliverable, and figure out what that looks like. And if you can, set a default value. If you know your demos on average take 45 minutes, but you schedule an hour, go ahead and set it so that all demos record as an hour in the system.
That's great. And do you have an ideal utilization rate that you shoot for on your teams?
Yeah, 60% customer facing activity. And again, that gives them 20% of time for project activity work and 20% for career development, learning, upskilling, things like that, cross training. There was one I missed early. So with tools from Courtney, with tools like Consensus, how big of a lift is it up front? And, you know, the whole thing about we're so busy, we don't have time to build the tools. I completely get that. And I would say for any tool that you're looking to use, you know, find a pilot group of people, right? Find a group of salespeople that will be champions with you, and get them to go on that journey with you to get those results, and then take it back and say, hey, look how great this was just with this time investment we had. This is what we were able to do. And actually, Brian over at SAP, that was a long-time consensus user, was helpful to me in the early days. And he said, look, we started out with just 5 videos, right? So we started out with 5 videos, we got some data, we showed that we were having great results, and then he started getting approved for more and more resources. Now he's got technical marketing engineers that do nothing but videos for their team because it's so effective for the team. Now, everybody has different resource levels, but my point is you can get started pretty well with a tool like Consensus with a small investment of time from your team on a pilot basis.
Awesome. Thank you. I do want to ask a question selfishly, that, you know, when talking about KPIs and even in the scope of utilization, you know, as you're implementing and trying to discover what these KPIs are for your organization, how long do you allow for these metrics to evolve until you are able to determine with some level of accuracy what your benchmarks are? You know, because as you said, that it can be dynamic. So at what point does that become less dynamic and more like, this is our benchmark that we can rely on?
I don't think you can tell anything about a data set with less than a quarter's worth of data, 3 months worth of data, probably. I will say that sometimes you need like a year, especially if you have seasonality to your business. So if you always have a massive Q4 or something like that, you want to be able to detect seasonality in your data patterns as well. But, you know, the best time to start was, what's that Chinese proverb? Best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The next best time is today, right? So get started, start putting these, you know, COLA type objects in your business. If you've already got them, great. Start looking at them in different ways because it'll tell you a lot as you're putting some of this stuff in place.
Awesome.
There was a question about product gaps across both won and lost opportunities. Yes. So product gaps stay alive even for deals that have been closed. What's interesting is sometimes you can go in and revive deals that were dead, if you will, right? Because you didn't have a given product or feature. If you're starting to track product gaps and product level feature requests like that, you can actually go back after a business that may have been lost in the past, because there's always going to be some number of deals that they just didn't do anything, right? It wasn't, they went with a competitor, they might have not done anything.
Yeah, Dean asked, have you dived into in-person versus virtual SE interactions?
So we have, and we track that. We created, so depending on the tool you use, you can use Salesforce, any CRM, you would create a type of demo because you do want to have granularity when you do utilization and capacity planning. You do want to know if it's preparation for an on-site demo versus preparation for a virtual demo. And we just created 2 categories for everything. We had standard virtual demos and custom virtual demos. And then we had standard and custom on-site demos. And obviously during COVID, it was 99%, 100% were virtual. So yeah, we left that granularity in place because it is good to understand, do you need to put a threshold in place for travel for deals of a certain size? So that's where that will help you out.
Awesome. Dave was asking or curious about what visualization tool you use to create the dashboards you showed on your slides.
Yep. So it's a mix. So the first slide for velocity, that was the Consensus Demolytics dashboard that I was showing for engagement. For the win rate, I was using the Vivint web app. For how effective are we or outcomes by effort, it was the Vivint Salesforce product Salesforce dashboards. They've got 4 that come out off the shelf or out of the box, if you will. And then for product gaps, it was also Vivint Salesforce product dashboards. And for utilization, it was the Vivint web app.
Awesome. Freddie had a great question. From all your years of experience, how much time do you think SEs spend on entering data and to track their activities? 5, 10, 15 hours per week? And how much time do you feel SE leaders spend on wrangling data to provide the pertinent reports to analyze the business?
I think leaders spend a lot of time. So I've got stories galore about that, right? I just had somebody reach out today for MBOs for C-level that I'm responsible for reporting up. And I immediately turned around, went back to my team. They were able to provide it pretty quickly because we've had to do this and we're starting to be asked some of the same questions over and over. But starting off, I think it varies by team, but Freddie, you know that I'm 100% with you. I think the less time that a SE spends on this, the better. So any systems or processes you can put in place to minimize that data entry, you'll get better adoption from the team on it. I would say, you know, telling the team that they need to be good about their data cleanliness and they need to do it, if not on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, is critical. Because again, if you don't show me that you're busy and your utilization is not where it's supposed to be, and you're only 20% busy according to the system, I'm probably going to give you more demos. So you should probably record the fact that you've got stuff going on. I think that's fair, right? Maintain the data so it helps all of us and it'll have benefits down the road. And anytime they come to me and say, hey, it would be easier if we did this, or we had this opportunity type, or this, you know, case type, I listen and try to put that feedback into effect, because the more adoption you can get from your team, the more useful these types of KPIs will be to lead the team. Yeah, automation's the way to go for sure.
100%. So Rob is asking about the AE to SE ratio and how that affects utilization percentage. That 60% that you shoot for, does the ratio affect that?
It does. It absolutely does. And the more people you add, the more time you have, right? So part of it is, if you can't add more people, or if you don't want to add more people, that's when you need to start looking at tools like Hub and Consensus and Vivint and get those automation solutions in place, right? Because you can do more with the same number of people if you have the tools to do it. But if you're burning up, you know, half of somebody's time to keep up with the data, that's not a very good use of a headcount. So absolutely, that ratio impacts how efficient your team is. But the tooling is the way to go. Tooling and automation, you know, just try it out and see how much time it saves you, is what I would say.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. Ellie says, as a leader, is it best to focus on tactical or numbers or both? Is one better than the other in your eyes?
So my rule of thumb is that team leads should be 80% operational. So they're player coaches in our organization. 80% operational, maybe 20% tactical. Managers should be something like 60-40 or 50-50 between operational, tactical. And then directors are more like, you know, 60% strategic, 40% tactical and operational. As you have more management resources available, I think you try to focus more on the strategic things and focus on the tools that are going to help you be more efficient as a team. So one of the interesting things I read recently was that a lot of the high-tech companies like Facebook and Twitter, they take their most talented engineers and they have them spend all their time building tools for the other engineers, because they're the most productive and the most capable, and it makes everybody else go faster. So I would think about it like that. Anytime that you can spend on making it easier for your team to do more stuff and improving your execution capability, you get more out of that time spent on tooling and thinking about the processes and the capacity planning.
Awesome. Yeah, I think we're getting pretty close to the end. So I guess we'll finish up with this one last question from Colm. Once you have the KPIs, thoughts on publishing them? To whom? How widely? Just to finance or more broadly? What about the team itself for transparency? How do you manage that?
I think it's very, very important. I think that's one of the key SE leadership skills, is not only managing your team and managing your horizontal relationships with other leaders, but also managing up. So you want to report these metrics up to chief sales officer. A lot of it's going to depend on who you report up through. This is a way to show the impact of your team. So definitely up through your leadership chain, you want to report this stuff up and have them find value in these metrics. So absolutely, on a weekly basis, I send this stuff out to the chief product officer, all the other sales leaders that I interact with, and my boss as well. And I want them to know these numbers and have these numbers at their fingertips. So when I go and say, hey, I need a new bid manager for ANZ for next quarter, they're going to ask me to see the numbers, but it's not catching them out of the blue, right? They know how much volume we're handling year over year, right? We're at over 100% year over year number of RFPs handled. So we just got a significant investment in our RFP management platform, for example, based on having those numbers at hand.
Yeah, I think that is spot on. I would 100% agree that you don't want to be working in a black box ever.
Yep.
Perfect. Well, thank you everyone for your questions, your comments in the chat. We're needing to wrap up right now, and appreciate everyone's input. Just want to remind everyone that each session you attend is an entry into our raffle to win some awesome prizes. So this is the last one of the day. I guess the next session is the last one of the day. And our final session directly after this one, so happening right now, is where we'll be raffling off all the prizes. So be sure to hop on over there and not miss out. And as I'm sure most people have heard, DEMOFEST is going on the road. In the next session, we'll be announcing what cities we'll be in this year. And spoiler alert, DFX is going to be big, so don't miss that. We also encourage you to stop by our expo hall to visit our premier partners of DEMOFEST. And again, there's no transfer of money involved in this event, so make sure to show our partners some love for helping make this event possible. Again, thank you all for joining. Thank you, David, for all of your input, your great insights. And make sure to head over to the stage area to join the closing session. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.